Chapter 78. Why? Surely you don't expect a guard to be unaware of that? There was a hint of hesitation and a great deal of doubt in the eyes of the young guard who had met his gaze squarely. However, Yudhir did not clarify the intent of his question. Incredible. He is the kind of person who couldn't help but tell everything. After the young guard had given all the answers and hastily left, Nahan, who had been watching him from a step behind all this time, approached Yudhir. Did you recognize that man as the guard we met last night and targeted him? No. However, as a result, the intimidation had been even more effective, which was fortunate. Following Yudhir, who walked decisively towards the house where Devron had lived, Nahan continued the conversation. I never imagined he would take the threat of revealing his name to Zakil so seriously. Why though? Even if you told Zakil, he would likely not care, as long as things were going as he wished. Just because the one on the top doesn't care doesn't mean those below feel the same way. As an example, he referred to the remarkably stern and intimidating old guard captain. I see. Nahan's eyes shone oddly, quickly grasping the meaning behind the words. So, lower-ranking individuals dislike even being mentioned, for fear it could offend those above them. How did you know such a subtle detail? Were you perhaps a member of the Imperial Army? Do I have to answer that as well? Yudhir quietly retorted, implying that the one losing wasn't him, but Nahan. At this, Nahan gave a low chuckle. I am a bit too curious, you see, especially when I met a competent brother like you. I would have thought I told you there were no brothers like you. Your coolness is almost at the level of a glacier's breath. Surely you could share that much. If you want to know, you should start sharing. Seemingly annoyed by Nahan's excessive curiosity and reluctance to share his own information first, Nahan quickly shut his mouth. Silence followed until they reached Devron's house. Here we are. Everything was charred black. The ruins were devastated even from afar, but the horror was more palpable up close. Yudhir slowly circling around the ruins, filled with the burned debris, and inspected it. The neighboring houses and streets they had seen on the way here were all marked by the same charred traces, but none as severe as Devron's house. At least the others hadn't collapsed like this. As Yudhir returned to his original position and looked down at the chaotic debris, Nahan stood next to him. Yudhir glanced at him and then opened his mouth. You have come this far as well, right? I did, Nahan casually agreed. However, I didn't discover anything beyond the conjecture that the fire here was more purposely destructive than elsewhere. This was in line with what Yudhir had thought. He was certain that the fire which had consumed Devron's house had been deliberately set, while the other parts of the village had been only superficially scorched. The fire that had been burnt this house down seemed intent on completely annihilating everything. If not, the house wouldn't have been destroyed to such an extent that its very form was unrecognizable. The villagers seemed to consider it ominous to even approach this place. The bodies inside must have burnt up, so it seems they plan to bury it as it is. Well, Yudhir stayed towards the ruined debris piled high, muttering about the secrets it could potentially hide within. Even if the outside has been burned, could the inside be same? Do you mean that there might still be a body inside? But it would be difficult to clear these ruins on our own. Yudhir gave a nonchalant wave of his hand without turning to look at the puzzled Nahan. Then a tremendous wind rose silently around the ruins of Devron's house, starting to lift the debris as one. The ground trembled minutely as if experiencing a mild earthquake, submitting to the immense power before. A moment later, they could clearly see the bare floor of Devron's house, revealing beneath the rubble floating midair. The inside, surprisingly, is rather intact. Nahan glanced back and forth between the debris and the floor, muttering quietly. We might be able to find traces of a body inside. They looked at each other, then stepped fearlessly into the interior. The old stone floor, hardly burned by the fire, was clean. However, if two people had indeed died here, there were no signs of their bodies. No bones, no blood, nothing else was visible. Most of the debris seemed to be furniture, dishes, and clothes from the house. Other than that, is this a shovel? As Nahan wandered among the floating debris, he nudged a small shovel with a burnt handle. Yudhir approached what seemed to be the area where a door and a wall stood, stepping over the charred debris. From the original shape of the floating debris above, it appeared that a bed might have been here. Then Yudhir noticed something small gleaming amidst the charred wood and cloth. What he grasped in his outstretched hand was a small, round piece of metal. Although it was difficult to recognize its original form due to the fire, it was certainly a piece of jewelry adorned with a gem. What's that? A brooch? It seems so. Yudhir examined the object, rolling it in his fingers. It appeared to be no ordinary brooch, but when he put pressure on the end, the inside jingled and twisted over so slightly. A spark of interest appeared in Yudhir's eyes at this realization. A double brooch. Even an ordinary brooch would be a luxury for a commoner, but this one was a double brooch designed with a hidden compartment. Yudhir remembered seeing such a double brooches in his previous life, often used by nobles to store miniature portraits of their loved ones. They were always popular in their romantic appeal, though he himself could never quite understand it. He tried to open the brooch by applying pressure with his fingers, but due to the distortion from the fire, it didn't open easily. After several attempts, Yudhir finally managed to pry it open. Inside, a small portrait revealed itself, fortunately undamaged by the fire. This is... Upon seeing the image, Yudhir unintentionally furrowed his brow. Nahan, peering into the brooch alongside him, had a similar reaction. A knight donned in a cloak with the insignia of the Harton family and a cross emblem. There's only one person who fits that description. Zakiel Harton had said that he had a brother who was a member of the Silver Cross Knight Order, and Devron Hartud had a father and a younger sister. Yudhir remembered Devron expressing concern to his fellow members that the Lord might not grant his request to move their residence due to his sister. Devron and his family had disappeared, but Zakiel Harton's brother had not died. The visage of the man in the fine brooch discovered in the ruins of Devron House. What did all this signify? Yudhir closed the brooch and tucked it into his chest pocket. Get out. I'm going to restore it to its original state. Have we found everything we came to find? Quick-witted, Nahan answered and slipped out of the ruins. Yudhir followed him out of the burned house, slowly releasing his power, and returned the remaining debris to their original places. A large amount of black dust rose from the ground, from the sound of crumbling, but none of the ashes flew to Yudhir, who was enveloped by the wind. Where are we heading next? To the back mountain as well? Yes. When they had arrived, they had heard from the young guard that the bodies of executed convicts were buried casually around a large rock in Mount Clement, extending behind the Hutton territory. Even if he committed suicide, Devron was a convict, so his body must have been buried there. Of course, if he truly died. No bodies of people who were said to have been burnt to death in the house were found. So, could Devron's body really be fully discovered? He felt like he could bet it wouldn't. And his thought was confirmed when they reached Mount Clement after about an hour's walk. Just as I thought, nothing. They quickly found the large rock used to bury the bodies of the convicts. As the young guard had said, the rock had a bizarre appearance, looking like a monstrous creature standing on two legs and roaring, making it easy to identify. The guard mentioned that the town people called it the Rock of Death. However, there were no signs around the Rock of the Death that suggested something had recently been buried. Just in case, Uther lightly manipulated the wind and earth to turn the area upside down. But all he found were a few skeletal fragments that seemed to have been buried a very long time ago. Over here, can you come this way? Then Nahan, who had disappeared a short distance away, called Uther. There's a pit here. The pit that Nahan found was closer to the woods than the area around the rock. It was narrow and deep enough to bury a person, but there was nothing inside it. Was it like this from the beginning? No, when I found it, the fallen leaves were covering it like this. Nahan moved his feet to roughly cover the pit with the pile of leaves that he had pushed to the side. It was clear that it had been covered up hastily. Uther pushed the leaves aside again and knelt down in front of the revealed pit. When he leaned over the look inside, a foul, damp smell wafted out. Although the scent was mixed with a strong smell of decaying leaves that had been piled up for a long time, the foul smell was extremely familiar to Uther. Uther reached out and randomly scooped out a handful of dirt inside the pit. Inside his black gloves, he could see a liquid that had not been completely dried out, seeping out from between crumbled soil. Blood. There was no doubt about it. It was blood.